Hi, Aubrey. I'm Chris Meyer, domestic violence and divorce lawyer for the Houston area, and this is my podcast. And I would like to talk to you about EMDR. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how can it help us, and what is it?
Yeah, sure. Hi, Chris, and I'm glad to be here. And I think this is a really important topic. And when we're thinking about the idea of and the concept that often most of us have some form of trauma in our lives and exposure to trauma or overwhelming situations. And this is kind of where EMDR comes in. That any of us who have had an overwhelming experience, who have had major trauma or even little trauma, we tend to, as our brain's trying to make sense of things, if it isn't able to fully process the information, it just gets stuck in our nervous system. And so EMDR, it stands for eye movement, desensitization, and reprocessing. And it was created by a woman named Francine Shapiro. And it's a psychotherapy that is designed to help people in healing from the symptoms and emotional distress that happen with disturbing life experiences. And we hear that old adage that time heals all. And as we better understand the brain, as there's been a lot more research, we understand that that's actually not accurate at all. And it sets people up for unnecessary suffering. And so with that thought, oftentimes we think, gosh, I should be able to get over this, or I shouldn't be feeling this way. But what we understand and know is that when PTSD develops, the experiences do get stuck in the nervous system and do not heal on its own. And so as we understand the brain and how it works, our brain is amazing, and it has this natural innate ability to process information. It kind of chooses out and selects and deletes information that's not important, and then stores information that is important and that's beneficial for our survival and to get through our day-to-day living. And this actually naturally occurs in REM sleep. So our brain kind of goes over the day. Here's information that we can delete. Here's information that we can, that we need to file away as useful information. But when we have really difficult experiences or emotional or somatic experiences, our brain needs to process it the same way. So, I mean, that's just kind of a little bit about EMDR, and just kind of it's helpful to understand that just as our brains are programmed to heal, just as our bodies are programmed to heal, so is our brain. And I think that's the empowering part about all the research and understanding that we now know about the brain, is that they used to view the brain as kind of fixed, and if something is wrong with the brain, it would always be that way, or if we were struggling with something. But now we really understand with the awareness of plasticity that the brain is healable and it's easily adjusted as we better make sense of emotional or traumatic experiences.
When you say neuroplasticity, what do you mean?
Yeah, so our brain essentially is plastic, meaning that it's moldable, it's healable, it's repairable. And so just because I have a limited view of life, or just because I see the world one way or have had these experiences that have narrowed my view on things, it doesn't mean that always has to be the case. So if I grew up in a abusive home and my world feels very scary and overwhelming, and that's been hardwired into my brain, we now, with the use of EMDR, know that we can take that negative cognition or that negative belief and really work to kind of spring clean or clean that out of the brain and help your brain make better sense of that difficult and overwhelming experience.
What if a trauma victim, someone has been through trauma, they have
Mm-hmm.
PTSD from the trauma, and you help them with EMDR, and you have success, but then they go back to that same environment. Is it unwired,
Mm-hmm.
or how does that work?
Yeah, I mean, that's definitely an interesting and complex scenario in the sense of, because with trauma, oftentimes what needs to happen for our brain to fully
Mm-hmm.
heal and to decrease the activation of the brain, our environment needs to feel safe. And
Okay.
so essentially what you would have to do is kind of help create safety even within the abusive or the toxic
Yeah.
environment. Mm-hmm.
Walk me through it. If I approach you, I said I've been through trauma and
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to do EMDR. What does that session look like?
Yeah. So the key really is looking at your history,
Mm-hmm.
because when we are using EMDR, we're essentially tapping into subconscious material in your brain. And so we need to be talking about and go through a history of what's actually in your nervous system. What are the overwhelming or difficult or traumatic experiences that could be there that could possibly come up. And so we would go through your history and then set up a few tools, because for me, I don't want to just go in there and jump right in without you having tools and resources to know that it's safe to do so, right?
Okay.
And the cool thing about EMDR is it's not, the old school way was that exposure therapy where you would just have to kind of sit in those really hard and overwhelming traumatic experiences and hope that your brain feels a decrease in activation. But with EMDR, it's not that way. We're really working to, and the metaphor that we use is it's kind of like being on a train. So you're noticing the experience, but you're not getting off the train. You're not reliving that experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so as we set up some tools and some supports to kind of make sure that that you feel safe, that you feel supported in tapping into that material, because otherwise your brain's going to kind of buck up against it. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And how does in these sessions, how does the eye movement part work?
Yeah, sure. So essentially the eye movement, it's replicating in REM sleep. So we know in
Okay.
REM sleep that your eyes are naturally doing that, right? And
Mm-hmm.
and so that's where Francine Shapiro kind of tapped in to recognize, okay, something's happening and our brain is processing information during that moment,
Okay.
those moments. And so, but there are a lot of ways that therapists use, essentially not everybody is going to do the eye movements. It's more looking at bilateral stimulation. So it could be the eye movements. The organic original way is I would hold up my two fingers on my dominant hand, and then
Mm-hmm.
I would wave them back and forth, and your job would be to focus on my fingers, and then,
Okay.
your eyes are just going back and forth. But we can also do where you would give yourself essentially a little hug and go back and forth. We call it a butterfly tap or a butterfly hug, and
Mm-hmm.
you would just bilaterally stimulate, or you can tap on your legs. I also use what's called buzzies, and so you just hold in your hand these two buzzers, and then they will just go back and forth, back and forth.
Is
And
it
as
because the eye would kind of go in the direction of the buzzers, or is it
yes,
at this
it's
point?
just tapping into your brain.
Okay.
Yes.
Oh, that's interesting. Okay.
hmm
And okay,
But
so
there's therapists also that will do like a light bar or music going back and forth. So there's definitely several ways of getting the stimulation.
we're recreating what the brain goes through during REM, I guess.
Correct. Yep.
Okay, so now we opened. I guess we open the brain. What do you? I mean, what do you tell the patient? Or
So the cool thing about EMDR is what we're doing is we're essentially choosing a target or a focus
mm-hmm.
point, and we'll say, okay, so let's talk about this experience of when you were in this domestic violence
Okay.
situation, and you essentially would say, tell me about the negative belief about yourself now. And that could be, I didn't have a voice. I didn't have any power. I am weak. And so essentially you would think about the target
Okay.
with the negative belief. And then again, what you're looking for is clearing out any and all information that's related to that experience. And it's amazing how your brain works, because you will, your brain will lead you to where it needs to go. So people will
Hmm.
say oftentimes, well, I don't know all the information. I don't remember all the details. And you don't have to. Your brain will do what it needs to. And in fact, when we do regular talk therapy, we're only using part of our brain, which is the left part of your brain, where when we're doing EMDR, we're tapping into the complete brain and your body. And so it may be that you are, you'll notice, oh, I feel a lot of tension in my stomach or in my chest. Okay, notice that. I remember an experience, when this happened. Okay, notice that. And so you're remembering details of it, and essentially it's kind of like cleaning a room, where you're going from room to room and you're kind of going through those experiences and you're clearing out and sweeping through those experiences until that experience feels complete. And then what happens is your brain then will file away as useful information, but it's no longer raw and fragmented out there. Because
Okay.
when we have a traumatic experience, our brain naturally says, hey, this is too much information. I don't know what to do with it. And it splits it and fragments it, and it sends it to different parts of the brain. So essentially with EMDR, we're pulling in all the information that are stored in different parts of the brain to help fully consolidate that memory.
No, and that's all. So we address these targets during the eye movement.
Mhm.
Okay, and then okay, so we approach the target, we address the target,
Mhm.
it was child abuse.
Mhm.
Now so we bring up the child abuse, but how do you tell the brain, okay, we see the child abuse, but how do we put it away? How do we tell the brain to file it away as something less
Yep.
fragmented?
Yeah. So essentially, what you're doing is you're using the brain to identify any information that is relatable to that experience. And so as you're talking about it, and especially if it was childhood abuse, it may
Hmm.
not be real accurate memories or details. It may be a lot of, as you're thinking about that experience, you feel a lot of pressure in your head, or you feel an aching somewhere in your body, So it may not necessarily be cognitive information that's coming up, but essentially what you're doing is you're noticing and you're thinking about this experience while the stimulation is going on, until you don't notice anything else. And then we do a body scan to make sure that there's not anything else relatable or stuck in the body. And then essentially what we're doing at the very end is we're saying, okay, now what is a positive cognition that we can include in this file? Because when we do EMDR, it's not erasing the experience from your memory, right?
Okay.
All it's doing, though, is it's taking the sting, it's clearing out the trigger of it, so that we're filing it away as useful information, and now with a positive cognition. So maybe when you originally were thinking about that abuse and the negative belief was, I'm weak, or I have no control, and then when you're done focusing on it, when your brain's kind of sorted through all the information that it needs to, and then you will file away with a positive cognition, such as, I was little and I did the best that I could, or I have more control now, or I have a voice, whatever it is. And that's the other thing about EMDR is it's really self-driven, because this isn't any information that I as a therapist am saying, okay, have you thought about this? Or, that your brain's actually doing all the natural healing that it needs to, and also coming up with all of this information on its own. So I can guide you through the process but it's really empowering because it's not me influencing these beliefs. It's not me putting in the positive statement. That is something that you're creating and filing away as useful information with that title. Does that make sense?
Makes sense.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Okay. No, this is very, very interesting. I thoroughly enjoyed this. And thank you for sharing your information about EMDR and how it can help us and how it can help victims who have been through trauma, repair themselves and lead better lives. I really do appreciate your time, Aubrey.
Yeah, sure. I get really excited and empowered talking about EMDR. I think it's an amazing resource. And, I think anybody who's been through trauma, when you have that experience of feeling stuck or feeling like this is all my life's going to be or things aren't going to get better, and realizing that there are great resources out there and you don't have to continue to live how you're living, and your brain can heal and go on to do amazing things. So I appreciate you sharing this information, and definitely there's great resources out there. So check out the EMDR website and reach out to somebody if you need further questions or need more resources of how to get help with EMDR.
Do you practice virtually or just Houston area or?
I do. I do virtually and in person. I'm out of Missouri City. With trauma, I do prefer in person, especially to start, realizing that I want to make sure that you feel safe, that you feel supported. But I've had great success at working with people who have just done it, all virtually.
Okay. Well, I'm going to leave your information about your website and any other resources you want to make available. I'll leave that down in the article portion associated with this podcast or down in the description. But thank you, Aubrey, and also thank you for everyone listening. Please consider subscribing.